You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Mama Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn, and thanks for joining me and...
Hello again.
Husband Pat for our weekly segment where we get to sit down and look at each other in the face and have a nice conversation without children interrupting.
Isn't it a pleasure and a joy?
It is. And here you all get to listen to our conversations, which oddly enough, I mean, even if we didn't have the microphones in front of us and the record button pressed in, we talk about this stuff all the time. This is like a normal conversation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So.
Yes. I mean, the Catholic life should be suffused with the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
If you're not having regular, I mean, first off, it's like, what could be more interesting than the Catholic faith? I mean, like, this is reality. What are you going to talk about? Fantasy? I mean, that's fine and dandy as long as it points back to reality, like, say, The Lord of the Rings or something like that. But I want to know what's up. I want to know how to get this stuff right. And in that sense, it seems like religious conversations are the most important conversations. And every other conversation should be, this will be a point of the episode, should be filtered through that religious paradigm. It should be seen through the Catholic lens. How do I handle political situations as a Catholic? How do I handle my family situations as a Catholic? Having the right paradigm, the right lens is critically important to flourishing as a human and, of course, attaining our final end in the beatific vision, achieving eternal friendship with our Lord and God.
God willing.
Mm-hmm. God willing.
So you've recently started delving into this topic that we're going to go over. Do you want to introduce it since this is hot and fresh on your mind?
Right. So I am doing some work again with St. Paul Street Evangelization, and I will give them a deserved shout-out. They are a wonderful apostolate based over in Warren, Michigan. I had the high privilege of helping to design their curriculum for atheism. Meaning giving reasons for why atheists should reconsider religion, and specifically the Catholic faith. And I spent a good amount of time putting together arguments from natural theology, philosophical arguments for God, arguments to take into account scientific evidence, modern cosmology, astrophysics, that all seem to converge on a similar conclusion, that there is a transcendent, intelligent designer of the universe in which we currently inhabit, and putting that together as a curriculum for street evangelists who literally go out in the streets and just try to strike up conversations with people and making sure that they are equipped for charitable and productive dialogue. That was awesome. I have recently been, again, very grateful to have been brought back on for another project, and this one is for lukewarm Catholics. This includes Catholics who have fallen away from the faith, or just maybe aren't, that inspired about the faith, or maybe they consider themselves Catholic, but they have all kinds of disagreements with Catholic teaching. And so this curriculum that I'm helping put together now really focuses on, okay, how do we re-inspire the Catholic faith in lukewarm Catholics? How do we get them to see the wonderful gift that is the church, get them to recognize the importance of church authority, the truth of Catholic teaching, even if it doesn't, quite align with their current worldview. And that's really the biggest thing. What the problem with a lot of people who are lukewarm Catholics is they just don't see the world. This is going to sound uncharitable, but they're a little bit insane, right? And what I mean by that is sanity is seeing reality for what it is. And reality for what it is what is the Catholic faith. Like, this is reality. God exists. He incarnated, he resurrected, right? And he has revealed these truths to us. And so the most sane thing you can be is an Orthodox Catholic, because you're seeing reality more clearly because you're just seeing reality as it is, rather than the way you just want it to be. And so when people shift away from that, when they assume a different type of paradigm, and that's what I talk a lot about in this curriculum. They might assume like a political paradigm or a secular paradigm or even a Protestant paradigm. So even though they might still call themselves and consider themselves Catholic, even though they might attend Mass and things like that, they don't see the world through a Catholic paradigm. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the shift in the paradigm. Say, no, you need to see the world through a Catholic paradigm, and you should, because it's the right paradigm. And I unpack all the different things that paradigm is about and includes, such as the indefectibility and the authority of the church, and why we can trust and celebrate church teachings on matters of faith and morals, and we would be foolish to reject them.
Yeah, I know you and I have been frustrated at various times by Catholics who just don't uphold Catholic values, or will go to adult catechesis sessions, and the leader of it, who you would assume that a person who is volunteering to lead Catholic catechesis for adults would be a staunch supporter of the church, and yet they will start off the session by opening with their disagreements with the church.
Yeah, let's pop open a bottle of heresy and pass it around. This is one of the biggest surprises, and I have to say frustrations of becoming Catholic is you become Catholic, and you're on fire with the faith, and you're like, I want to go out and I want to evangelize and I want to make the whole world Catholic. And then you go into different parishes and you realize, oh my goodness, we need to
evangelize our own.
We need to spend some time here. Like, the problem is, like, some of the major problems are here of like Catholics themselves who do not understand the faith. And this isn't to blame them. We know that there's just been very poor catechesis these past couple of decades, that people just were not brought up properly. The failures of many people who had the obligation to catechize children and didn't. Religious leaders, parents. So a lot of people want to just blame the current generation. But look, the current generation is a product of the environment they were born in. So you can't just do that. And you have to be compassionate. You have to be patient. You have to try to understand where they're coming from. And you have to try to articulate in the best way that you can arguments for why, that undermine whatever paradigm they're holding. And there's usually two different paradigms, right, that I've found when engaging in many different Catholic community groups. There is a political paradigm, a secular paradigm, where they just assume, positions of liberalism, say, of modern liberalism.
Yeah, there was a photo going around from a recent political rally, and somebody was holding a sign that said something to akin, I'm paraphrasing, that abortion is Catholic health care.
Oh, it's a preposterous nonsense.
Right, but so that person probably is Catholic, I would assume, if they're holding that sign, or they think they are. But really they're operating off, a secular or liberal paradigm, like you say.
And so a lot of it will be, using the Socratic method and undermining these paradigms, really to help people understand that I have just assumed that this is the case. And I really don't have a very consistent or coherent worldview for why I believe these things. But I'm very passionate about them, and I feel very confident the Catholic Church is wrong, but I can't articulate why, right? And trying to get people to understand that, no, the Church in her wisdom, as founded and guided by God, is here to provide the moral blueprint for us. Morality, properly understood, is a blueprint for human flourishing. So if you want to be happy, which all of us do, right? All of us cannot want anything but our own happiness, and God wants our own happiness for us, then we should do that which will make us happy. And that which will make us happy is to follow the divine and natural law. The natural law, we can figure out a good amount of it through human reasoning by reflecting on human nature, which I go over in this curriculum. But God has also helped us through revelation. He has articulated, commandments to us specifically, which either corresponds with the natural law or super adds to it. It goes over and above it, but it never conflicts with it. And the Catholic Church in her moral teaching, relies both on preserving divine revelation and philosophical reflection on the natural law. So nothing the Church teaches, anything from sexual ethics to abortion, any of it, none of it is arbitrary. None of it is just happens to be old beliefs that are outdated. No, there's robust intellectual muscle philosophically to support these beliefs. It just happens most people aren't unaware of the tradition. And of course, there is the preservation of these beliefs having been divinely revealed by God. So the Catholic Church, in her authority, issues and doesn't issue, it preserves and upholds and clarifies and articulates the moral life for our own benefit, for our own flourishing, so we can be most of the kinds of creatures we are, and that we can attain that proper end of getting to heaven. And it's kind of a cliche, but a big part of getting to heaven is getting heaven into us. That's what sanctification is. That's what the moral life ultimately is about. Anyway, I'm probably getting way too far ahead of myself, but that's a kind of general sketch of the project.
Okay, so where do you want to begin?
Well, I think an interesting place to begin, and it's kind of a catchy headline, but I use it in the... I also wrote an article for Word on Fire for this. It's a couple months old now at this point, maybe even a year old, about the question of whether Catholicism is a religion or a relationship. And I think this is a good place to start. Especially when we're working with or talking with Catholics that hold a very Protestant type of paradigm, right? Because the Protestant claim is, hey, I don't need all that stuff. I have my relationship with God, or I have my relationship with Jesus. And it's not just a Protestant thing. You know, you see it in the kind of spiritual but not religious sense too, where people will say, you know, that's nice that you have all your ceremonial stuff, but, you know, who are you to try and dictate the way that I have my relationship with God?
Yeah, they
right?
eschew the collective for just a very egotistical worship.
Right. And there's a couple ways that we can address this, but the argument that I make is that Catholicism is the proper relationship with God. Catholicism concerns the question of, okay, yes, we definitely want a relationship with God, but how does God want us to have a relationship with him, right? So the Catholics can be confident about this, and I think should be, in a sense that everyone wants to talk about how they want to have their relationship with God. But who's asking, okay, is there a way that God has said, here's how I want you to have a relationship with me? And what I contend is God has made that very clear. And he's made that very clear through, of course, the divine person of Jesus Christ, who founded the Catholic Church and gave us the church, specifically the sacraments, and his body as the absolute means to salvation, that this is the way that God wants us to have the most intimate relationship with him possible. So in that sense, Catholicism, being the one true faith, is the truest, most intimate relationship that we can possibly have with God. It's the way that God wants us to have a relationship with him. And, it's probably worth spending a few minutes, maybe just kind of swatting through a few different objections that people typically bring up when it comes to this, because I think the kind of modern, again, if we're talking about paradigms, one of the sort of modern relativistic paradigms is, well, look, man, there's a whole bunch of different religious beliefs in the world, and who am I to say that my religion is true and that all the other religions are false? Like, isn't that like supremely arrogant? And my answer would be a couple of things, actually. One is that, first off, people hold differing beliefs all the time. There's competing theories in science, in philosophy, in politics, and the fact that we even have discussion and debate assumes, at least implicitly, that somebody's got the right one, right? So this charge against religion would immediately, sort of undermine rational discourse among humans everywhere and at all times. So if it proved anything, it would prove way too much. And it would, of course, undermine the person who is assuming the position that his or hers is right, that no religion is right. So it's self-defeating in that sense. And furthermore, if you're going to...
Hold on real quick. Can you just say that again? Because that's an interesting point that I don't think people think of it that way when they say, who am I to say that my religion is right, these aren't? Say that again. Yeah.
So if you say that, because there's all these different competing religious beliefs, and you think Catholicism is true, and this guy thinks that Protestantism is true, and this guy thinks that Hinduism is true, I just think that all religions are false, essentially. What you're saying is that, no, you think that you're right and everybody else is wrong. Why should we privilege your position? What evidence or arguments do you have? So if you're going to say that somebody is arrogant for saying that they're right, while at the same time you're saying you're right, well, the arrogance charge would cut both ways, my friend.
Right.
So if it would prove anything, it would prove too much. It's just a dumb argument. Yep. And some arguments really are dumb.
Yeah, but that's a very common one that people don't, like, they don't put those two things together very often.
And the reason that we think that some position might be true is because we have good reasons to believe it. And the reason we think that Catholicism is true is because we have good reasons to believe it. We have, for example, the arguments from natural theology, which I built out in the first curriculum and that I've done a lot of work on, that we can do through philosophical reasoning and with the support of scientific evidence, establish a very robust conception of God specifically a moral monotheism. And that alone sort of whittles down the religious hunt, right? It really kind of narrows down possibly true religions to the great monotheistic traditions, right? So Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And then from there, we can just look at the historical evidence surrounding the life, death, and purported resurrection of Jesus Christ. And here people are often very surprised to learn that we have incredible testimony of the facts, incredible testimony for the historical facts of the crucifixion of Christ, for the empty tomb, for post-mortem appearances, and for the rapid origin of Christian belief. And the argument can be made, and has been made, for anybody who's interested in looking into this, you can either head over to St. Paul Street Evangelization, or maybe we can list some resources as well, that once you establish the facts, once you establish the reliability of the Gospels, and you have these historical data points, you cannot explain them through natural means. The only thing that can explain them is, of course, that God raised Jesus bodily from the dead, that the resurrection really happened. And this makes sense, right? So if we have prior background evidence that we already have good reasons to believe in a God, the sort of God of classical theism that has these omni-attributes, omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, then, of course, like something like the resurrection makes sense in light of that prior worldview. We might not have been able to predict it, but it fits well with that. It fits like a hand in a glove, so to speak. And furthermore, if some religion is true, right, we might expect some sort of divine endorsement. Well, what could that possibly be aside from some type of a miracle claim? And when you actually apply some philosophical scrutiny to miracle claims, you can wash away all the bogus miracle claims pretty easily in the various world religions when you apply some decent criteria, including and especially the miracle claims of Muhammad, which are just completely bogus. First off, there's none in the Quran at all, right? The miracle claims of Muhammad only occur much later, which is the opposite of, the Quran just says, well, try and write the Quran, and you'll see that this is a miracle. Not very convincing, right? But the resurrection is right at ground zero, right? We have the earliest reports possible of this historical event, multiple independent attestation, eyewitness testimony, undesigned coincidences, it meets every standard of historical reliability. And then you realize this cannot be explained apart from some supernatural act, a miraculous act. And that's just God signing off on Christianity is the right way to see that. So all this is to say is that we believe Catholicism is true, not because of arrogance, but because it seems true, that we have good reason to support it, right? And of course, this doesn't undermine faith. As Catholics, we believe that faith and reason go together. They are the wings of the same dove that lead us to truth, right? As St. Pope John Paul II said. So those, that's just kind of like the standard, I think, paradigm assumption of our relativistic culture that I just run into so often. Well, my friend's a Hindu. And look, one of my best friends is a Hindu, so I actually know what you're talking about, right? Like literally. And I tell him frequently that I think that he's wrong. And we're still great friends, right? So you can do that, and you can do that charitably. But, the reason that we're Catholics is because we believe that something happened. And I think it's also really important just to make the historical note that, like, at the origin of Christianity, right? Just think about this. When the followers of Christ witnessed his resurrection, it was of no surprise to them that there were different religious beliefs at the time. Could you imagine them saying, wow, we just witnessed God literally break into human history, and he commanded us to evangelize people, but you know what? There's a lot of different beliefs going around, and how, what should we, who are we to say? It's so preposterous. No, something happened. God broke into human history, revealed specifically his purposes for us, gave us specifically a way to relate to him, primarily through the Eucharist, and by joining his church, right? The very same church that exists today, and he commanded us to make disciples. So I think it's just important that, to just get back into the historical context and realize how silly some of these modern assumptions are. Yeah,
we've come across this for various reasons in talking with Protestant friends, that they'll say something like, "Oh, I really feel like there's a maternal instinct missing from my Christian faith. Well, if you're Catholic, you get Mary. Or there seems like I'm trying so hard to have this personal relationship with Jesus, but I'm not feeling it. Is he there? Is he listening to me? Well, or does he forgive me? Does God forgive me for what I've done? Well, we have the sacrament of confession, or reconciliation. We have the sacrament of the Eucharist, that we can continually enjoy and know that, this relationship with Jesus comes from, it's a communal collective relationship. It isn't this singular I, it's a collective we as part of the church body. And, it really takes us out of ourselves. And it's not that God stopped talking to us when after his ascension in the year 33, right? It is a continual, we are constantly being communicated to by God, and that is through our sacraments that the church left us.
And not only that, but people can ask, hey, if God exists and he loves us, what might I expect? And you might not be able to predict that something will happen, but if you have data that something did happen, then that might be something that you could expect given the God of classical theism. So if God exists, right, might I expect that he would incarnate and die for my sins and gloriously resurrect from the dead, and that I would have historical evidence that this actually occurred? The answer is, yeah, I can make sense of that on that worldview. I might not predict what exactly the probability is that God would do that thing specifically, but it definitely fits, right? It's all converging. And that's often how we come to hold a belief. That's often how we come to assent, right? It's not often usually just through one argument or one piece of evidence. It's usually through a series of arguments and evidences and experiences and testimony that all sort of converge on the same theme, on the same conclusion. And that's certainly how I think the case for religion can and should be made, right? It's the cumulative case, like this piece of evidence here, that argument there, until it becomes overwhelming. It tips the scales. Yes, this is true. But even furthermore, if Catholicism is true, might I expect that the church would endure, for example, because that's one of the promises of Christ? Yeah, I would expect that. And what do I see? 2,000 years. 2,000 years the church has survived.
Despite all the attempts of sinful people.
Name me one other human bureaucracy, right? Oh, baby Marin. She's joining us. Yeah, this is not within the realm of possibility for bumbling human bureaucracy to survive like the Catholic Church has survived and endured. And furthermore, might we expect that there might be confirmatory signs and miracles along the way? I might expect that, right? Especially as we become detached from history. And we have Eucharistic miracles. We have apparitions. We have the miracle of the sun, Fatima, 70,000 people, a publicly attested miracle that you can't...
That even attending atheists will agree that they saw.
The secularist newspaper said, we can't explain this, right? And what is that doing? It's pointing back to the truth. Miracles have a purpose, right? Miracles aren't just for God to show that he's there and he exists and powerful. They have a salvific purpose, right? And that's why through the Bible, miracles are pretty infrequent. We don't see miracles often. They're just like clusters. We have the initial creation of the universe, and that's not even really a miracle. That's just God's act of creation, because a miracle requires first that there's some natural order upon which, God sort of adds something to it or suspends something. So you can't even say that the creation is a miracle because there's no natural order, right? God puts the natural order into existence. And then we have Exodus, and then of course we have the works and life of Jesus. But miracles are actually pretty sparse throughout the Bible.
Yeah, and actually in the Catechism, especially in the sickness section, which I just talked about in my latest recent Catechism Friday episode, that miracles, Jesus could have performed a miracle and healed everyone, but he didn't heal everyone. It was to link us back to God and then show us the promise of the future. That's
exactly right. Miracles are there to serve a salvific purpose, right? So if people could understand that, they would save themselves a lot of confusion, a lot of religious confusion, right? Christ wasn't there just to prove his divinity, for example. Now, that was an important part of it, right? That we came to an understanding of Christ's divinity. But all of what God is doing is a salvific masterpiece. It's a soul-building masterpiece, a sanctifying masterpiece. It's meant to get us to eternal life and friendship with Him. So miracles might be a part of that, and we might require miracles at some times for certain reasons, but that doesn't mean that we should necessarily expect constant, frequent miracles all the time. And that's not what we see through the history of Christianity. Certainly not what we see in the Bible. So yeah, that's some stuff. But I have a quote from St. Augustine that I think is nice.
Wonderful. Let's hear it.
For the authority of the Catholic Church. St. Augustine says, "In the Catholic Church there are many things which most justly keep me in her bosom. The consent of peoples and nations keeps me in the Church. So does her authority, inaugurated by miracles, nourished by hope, enlarged by love, established by age. The succession of priests keeps me, beginning from the very seat of the Apostle Peter, to whom the Lord, after his resurrection, gave it in charge to feed his sheep," John 21, 15 and 19, "down to the present episcopate." I mean, so he's just affirming all the essential Catholic dogma there, right? And so, lastly, does the very name Catholic, which, without reason, amid so many heresies, the Church has thus retained, so that, though all heretics wish to be called Catholics, yet when a stranger asks where the Catholic Church meets, no heretic will venture to point to his own chapel or house. And so
Truth
St.
through the ages from St. Augustine.
And I think he highlights all the really important points there, that the Church, it was given to us by God. The Catholic Church is established by God, nourished by hope, inaugurated by miracles, enlarged by love. I love it.
Yes. And also, I mean, to move on to, say, a secular or, I guess, our cultural Catholic, that it was established by God, but it is still nurtured by God. It is still tended as a shepherd tends to his sheep. It is not left to the devices of just evil men trying to take over and control and reign through fear, try to keep people in line and only acting just so. This is a church that was established by our Lord, but also continued on by the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
And this is important. I think we could spend a little bit of time talking about an essential dogma that many Catholics are unfamiliar with, which is the indefectibility of the Church. And the indefectibility of the Church essentially says that she will remain the institution of salvation founded by Christ until the end of the world. And so if we unpack this a little bit, what we're really saying here is that the Catholic Church will endure until the end of the world. It will never be corrupt in faith, morals, authority, and sacraments. Those four things, because those four things just are the Catholic Church, right? So the Catholic Church will never become corrupt in faith, morals, authority, and sacraments, because if the Catholic Church did become corrupt in faith, morals, authority, or sacraments, it just wouldn't be the Catholic Church anymore. So it would have defected. And the dogma of indefectibility says that no, the Catholic Church will endure. And once you understand that, you realize that it must endure in those four essential areas. And we can give some support for this, as we should. And I'll say the first reason for accepting the indefectibility of the Church is because God taught it. And we can find much support for this in the Scriptures, but let me just give two passages, both from Matthew's Gospel. So the first one will be Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27. I'll read this, and then I'll connect it with another passage from Matthew. So Matthew 7, 24 to 27 reads, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house upon the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And if the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it." So that was Matthew 7, verses 24 to 27. And we're learning about what it means to build something upon a rock, right? So just keep that in mind. Then we go to Matthew 16, verses 18 and 19. Words of our blessed Lord once more. "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Now, Catholics often understand that this is Christ establishing his church on the first pope, Peter, right? But what they often miss is the linking back to that Matthew 7 of what that means, right? So Christ establishes first, right, that what it means to build something upon a rock, right, which is endurability. And then he establishes his church upon the rock of Peter. Therefore, Christ left us with a church that will endure even against the gates of hell, founded on the first pope, the primary apostle, Peter. Now, this is powerful scriptural support against the Protestant claim that the church is biblically unfounded, which is, again, put that in the category of nonsense. Not only can every dogma of the Catholic Church be scripturally supported, but the fact that we even have the Bible at all is because of the authority of the Church. It's precisely because of the Church's indefectibility that we can reliably affirm the canon of Scripture, since it was the Catholic Church that decided what was and wasn't Scripture. So you really have a dilemma here. You can have the Church and the Bible, but you cannot have the Bible without the Church. And that is something that I think every Protestant eventually needs to reconcile with. We can push it further and push against the sort of Protestant claim to sola scriptura, and maybe that's worth doing, but I think it's at least worth taking a minute to affirm the essential doctrine of indefectibility of the Catholic Church and see that bound up with that is the authority of the Church. Christ gives his authority. Whatever you bind will be bound in heaven, right? Whatever you loose will be loose in heaven. He is giving that authority to the Church to be able to lay that down. That's significant. That's serious, right?
Now, could a person, an individual person or a collective group of people know truth before the Church does, like on same-sex marriage or the legality or morality of abortion? Could certain people know the truth of that before the Church comes around, or is the Church always correct?
Yes, and many people have, right? Especially reflective ancient philosophers, right? So we see the origins of natural law in Plato and Aristotle, right? Who reflected upon human nature. So just to give a quick idea of traditional natural law, right, is that things have natures or essences, right? They're sort of form or organizing principle of what makes it the kind of thing that it is. It's whatness, if you will. So a couple common examples, right? The nature of a triangle is to be a geometric shape with three sides whose angles add up to 180 degrees, right? And when we understand the nature of triangularity, we can make objective value assessments when somebody draws a triangle. So say somebody draws a triangle very carefully with a protractor. It's got straight sides, sharp angles. We say, nicely done. That's a good triangle because it exemplifies the ideal, or at least gets close to exemplifying the ideal of triangularity, right, of what it means to be a triangle. Now, contrast this with somebody who draws a triangle very hastily on the backseat of a school bus, and it's got wavy sides and rounded angles. We would say that's a bad triangle. And we're not saying, hey, I prefer my triangles like this. Maybe you have your own preference of triangle. No, that's stupid, right? We're saying, no, given the nature of triangularity, that's a defective triangle. It's bad, right? There's something about the nature of triangle that's missing here. There's a privation. Another example would be eyesight. Within the nature of eyesight is the orientation towards, or the teleology towards, vision, to see well. And so when somebody can't see well, like me with glasses, they say, hey, you got bad eyes, don't you? And I don't take offense at that. Yeah, I do. I just don't see very well. There's something missing from my eyes, right? There's a privation.
I like that.
That's just not that. So to think of evil like this. Evil is something that it only has a conceptual reality. It doesn't have a real reality. Evil is like the hole in the sock, right? It's a do-good gone missing. So vision is due to the nature of eyesight. But for somebody who's blind, that's there. Like you can't touch eyesight, you can't grasp eyesight, you can't measure. You can't touch blindness, you can't measure blindness. It's something that's absent that should be there. It's a hole in being, or it's a hole in goodness that isn't attaining that should attain, or is due to the nature of that, right? Well, once you have this conceptual framework of natural law, that there's essences, and within the essence that there are certain ends that essence is meant to attain by its very nature, the concept generalizes and realize this is true for human beings as well. Now, the difficulty is that human beings are far more complex than triangles, eyesights, acorns, dogs, right? But a general sketch can just get the argument off the ground that we are rational animals. Our essence is that, yeah, we're animals, but there's a specific difference, right? We have in philosophy of genus and specific difference. Our specific difference is rationality. What makes us unique is that we can grasp universals, abstract concepts. We can reason according to canons of logic. No other beast can do this. Not even the highest primate can even get close to doing anything like this. It's a difference in kind, and not just a difference in degree. And this is also what makes us moral beings. So, if an eye fails to see, it's not doing a moral wrong because an eye doesn't have rationality. It can't understand concepts and freely choose to either pursue the good or pursue what is not good, pursue what is evil. So morality is a rational enterprise. So morality is really restricted to rational agents, which as far as we know, in terms of material things, is just humans. There might be rational aliens out there, who knows, right? But it's really humans, the
at least
angels,
on Earth,
angels
sure,
as well, things like that.
Earth
But on Earth,
yeah.
morality is only a human enterprise, right? Animals don't have moral status. That sometimes shocks people, but of course they don't, right? We don't hold a lion morally accountable when it goes out and mauls something to death, right?
So you can't have a bad dog.
Not
the dog
right?
that gets into the trash can and pulls out everything, including the coffee grounds, and spreads it all. Our dog isn't a bad dog.
You can have a bad dog, but it wouldn't be a morally bad dog. So say our dog only wanted to eat like toothpaste. We'd be like, okay, there's something wrong with this dog, right? Like a dog should not, like by the nature of dogness, dog, from what we know, it like doesn't normally sustain itself from toothpaste, right? So, but no, there's something wrong here. We should get our dog treatment. So you can have a bad dog, like the same thing with a dog that's only born with three legs. We say that's a bad dog, and we don't mean we don't love the dog or don't care for the dog. We mean there's something missing there that should attain but hasn't attained, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Quick sketch then. The nature of the nature of reason is to attain truth, right? What reason is pointed at, like a triangle is pointed at having three straight sides whose angles add to 180 degrees, reason is pointing at the attainment of truth. Truth perfects reason, just like vision perfects eyesight. So what we want to do to flourish as rational animals is come to a knowledge of truth and avoid falsehoods. That's what perfects us. That's part of what perfects us, right? We also have wills, so we also want to delight in good things and beautiful things as well. And here's an interesting argument. If people want to deny that this is the case, right? If people want to say, no, things don't really have aims or essences. If you deny that the nature of reason is to point at truth or to attain truth, well, then you've just lost the argument. Because in order to give an argument against reason being pointed at truth, you have to assume that reason is being pointed at truth to say whether somebody is reasoning well or reasoning poorly, right? So any argument you could give against this would inherently assume it and be self-defeating. So you really can't escape this sort of traditional natural law perspective. Then it's a matter, and by the way, I'm trying to condense like a semester of stuff into like 10 minutes here. So like just realize we're skipping some of the finer details, but it's important for people to understand that the Catholic Church not just has divine revelation, but philosophical muscle on its side for ethical issues. Guess what? Like reason, I'm going to be a little direct here. The penis has, is the sexual. Should have said the penis, right?
Didn't know you were going to get into
We have
this.
rational
Okay.
faculties. We have sexual faculties, right? And there are ends to our sexual faculties. And the ends of the sexual faculties, like digestive faculties or anything else, what perfects the sexual faculties, what achieves the end is reproduction. Now, I hope I don't have to explain why that's the case. Anybody who isn't just being willfully obtuse knows that the end of sexual activity is reproduction, right? Just like the end of digestive activity is the assimilation of nutrition, right? Duh. Hopefully you don't have to argue for that. Again, this is like the litmus test. Anybody who argues against it, you just know they're being insincere, right? Well, okay, if we know that it is immoral or it is bad for us to frustrate our own flourishing or that which perfects any aspect of humanity, then it is immoral and bad for us to subvert or undermine any of our faculties, right? At least to some degree without some overriding reason. So, for example, take bulimia, right? Part of why we think bulimia is bad is somebody is taking what is otherwise an okay means, which is the pleasure from food, and frustrating the ends, which is the nutrition of food, and throwing it back up. This is an immoral act, right? It's bad for you to do that. Apply that same concept now. I know this is an emotionally charged concept, but apply it to birth control, apply it to masturbation, apply it to same-sex activity, right? It's the same concept. You're frustrating the natural end. You're perverting the faculty.
Right, you're taking the pleasure but not the natural end of it.
But not the end and the perfection of it. So, again, a lot of details missing, but it just gives you the sketch to show, no, this is a philosophical position that could be defended from soup to nuts, from start to finish. And then just layer on top the divine revelation, where clearly certain activities and things are explicitly condemned in Scripture, but they converge upon what we can know through reason as well. So there's your 101 to traditional natural law.
So if you have, say, a secular Catholic who believes that she or he knows best and they're more enlightened than the church is just an outdated patriarchy, and they just aren't understanding the truth of birth control or just the need for abortion, or why are they just lagging behind the times when it comes to same-sex marriage?
Right.
How do we respond to something like that?
Well, first off, if you have a very patient interlocutor, you can try and give a philosophical sketch of like what I just did to say, okay, well, how do we think about morality? What is the nature of morality? What grounds morality? And there, Catholics have really two responses. God is the ultimate grounds of morality, right? So C.S. Lewis once famously said that you can't make straight of a crooked line without at least having an implicit concept of a straight line. Same thing, we can't make sense of good or evil without some type of supreme transcendent standard of the perfect good, perfect beauty, perfect goodness, perfect justice, perfect mercy, perfect compassion, perfect home. What possibly could that be if not God, right? So without God, moral ontology collapses, right? We just have no grounding for objective, mind-independent moral reality. We really are cast into not just a relativism, but a nihilism. And I would argue that all relativism really collapses into nihilism anyways. Then, so that's sort of the moral ontology, or like the reality of morality. Like, is this really a mind-independent feature? And the answer is yes, it is. And it's ultimately grounded in God's very nature as perfect goodness, right? But then there's the moral epistemology, and epistemology is how do we know? How can we tell what is good from what is bad? And these are two different things, right? Moral ontology has to deal with the sort of status, of like, do moral values and duties actually exist? And moral epistemology deals with, okay, well, even if they exist, how do I know? How can I tell good from bad, right from wrong? And here we have a two-pronged approach with the Catholic faith. We have both direct revelation from God, and we have traditional natural law theory. So we can use philosophical reason, which can converge upon the divine revelation as well. And we'll see that they do converge very perfectly, and that the revelation completes or perfects or adds to what we can know through philosophical reasoning. Plus, I think we can just also push back on so many of the modern liberal assumptions of morality anyways. And I don't know if this is getting too off track for the episode or too far. But so many of them like, well, look, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, what's the big deal?
Yes, yep.
And that should be obvious from what's already stated, right? Is that like morality doesn't deal with just your interaction with other people. Morality has to do with yourself. Actually, it has to do primarily with yourself. What causes you to flourish as a rational animal? Now, obviously, if I'm mistreating somebody, if I'm abusing somebody, if I'm bullying somebody, and certainly if I'm murdering somebody, and especially if I'm murdering an innocent baby, that is about as evil as it gets, and that is bad in the most intimate sense, because that is frustrating my eternal end. That is distorting my soul. That is me really moving as far away from God as I can possibly get. So morality very much concerns the individual, not only in relationship to other people, but also himself. So when you understand rights as, that which squares with a moral norm, that's what a right is that which accords to a moral norm. You can never have a right, philosophically, theologically, to do something wrong to yourself. It makes no sense. You can never have a right to do a wrong. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's just a stupid liberal assumption that people just think, and like consent can only do so much, right? Like if I give you consent, it's because I'm allowing you to do something that otherwise would be prohibited, like take my car, for example. But how could consent do all these other, like consent isn't just some like magical wand that I can wave to make a wrong right. No, a wrong is wrong, full stop, right? So that's one way to approach it. And plus, if everybody is so perverted on an individual level, there's no way that you're going to not have perversion on a societal or collective level. So morality has to start with an individual. C.S. Lewis gives another good example here. He's like, look, if you want ships to all sail straight, each one of those ships better be in working order good individually. Because if not, one is going to careen off and bang into the other, and we're going to have a whole mess. So no, morality starts at home with you, how you treat yourself. So Catholics should have a very strong, robust moral philosophy and theology. Understand that things like looking at pornography are inherently immoral. They're inherently degrading to ourselves. Also, gluttony, right? Like, again, and everybody understands this intuitively. Nobody really thinks, unless they're just being a jerk, that somebody that is completely addicted to terrible drugs, even if they're not hurting anybody else, is doing a good thing. Everybody knows that's bad. That's a bad thing. And you should want to help that person, and all of us shouldn't actually want to do, but nobody admits that that's okay or good just because that person wanted to do that, right? And natural law just affirms these common sense intuitions, but just makes it, add some semi-technical jargon and some philosophical muscle to it, right?
I feel like you've covered a lot of ground. I mean, there's so much you'd think, and just like we thought when we came into the Catholic faith, like, oh, okay, we're going to go out and we're going to share the faith with non-Catholics and bring them in. And then we quickly found out that it was really the Catholics that needed to be re-energized and redirected in a lot of ways. Because the culture has seeped in to our Catholic faith. Right. But the church herself and all of her teachings, anything from the immorality of abortion to same-sex marriage to, currently priests having to be men. Women will not be priests.
And I hate to spend so much time on the same-sex issue because it's important to understand that this is like one out of many pages in Catholic moral teaching. It is.
Right? It's just the one that keeps coming up.
But it's because the Catholic Church has stood so rightly and firmly against the collapse of modern, culture on sexual ethics that it just gets so much attention. But it's like, just take sex in general, like same sex. Like, okay, what is the nature of sex? Well, the nature of sex, what we said, is something that is oriented towards reproduction. So in that sense, you can't even have same sex. That's just not sex. It's just not. It's like it's mutual masturbation or something like that. But it's not. And this sounds kind of crude, but like if you really think about it, right? Sex has a certain nature. There's something that makes sex, right? Sexual intercourse. And part of that is that it is at least directed towards reproduction. Now, there might be difficulties, like somebody might be infertile or whatever, but if those privations weren't there and things were working normally, it would be directed at reproduction. But if you have two people of the same sex doing stuff, they can be perfectly healthy, but that's never going to result in reproduction. So we're not even, so much of this has just been redefining things that make no sense whatsoever. Yeah,
so as a former incredibly liberal-minded person myself, a reformed, healed liberal, so I would have said back then that for one, in the animal kingdom, you would find a lot of same-sex relationships.
Righto.
Right, yep. Most animals have some kind of homosexuality in them. And also that perhaps then, the idea of reproduction, that's a crude, old version of humanity. And now we are more enlightened as we are now in the 20th and 21st centuries. And we can move beyond, sex is really for pleasure, not just for reproduction. That was back then.
Right. So a few things in response to that. One is what I said before, that morality is a rational enterprise. And nobody would want to look to the animal kingdom and say, look, this shark forcibly copulates with another shark. We see rape in the animal kingdom all the time. What's wrong with rape, right? So who in their right mind would ever want to adjust human morality based off the animal kingdom? That's absolutely barbaric. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. No offense.
That's okay. Right? This is why I like to say I'm susceptible to reason. I just needed somebody to explain all this to me, and I came around. But you're right. I mean, nobody has ever said it like that I've heard. In my liberalness in the past. Yeah.
And the other thing are just definitions. Like, good definitions should be coextensive, right? They should be broad enough to accommodate everything that should be fit in a definition, but not so broad that it lets other things in it, right? So, obviously, the definition of sex, historically, traditionally, has been an activity between a man and a woman that is inherently oriented towards reproduction, right? So it lets in the things we need to let in, but it doesn't let in too much, right, for a definition. So, and then if you just want to change the definition of sex, okay, fine, we'll just change the word of the terms. But then, like, what is this thing? Like, what is the term referring to? What is it signifying? So we can play word games all the time, but that's
I think
at the deeper issue,
no,
right?
You're right, and that's a big problem. I think when you try to have conversations or good arguments. I'm not saying fights, arguments with people, is that they will get so hung up on definitions that you cannot move forward.
Right.
So what do you do in a situation like that? Because I guarantee
you just say what I said, right? It's like, look, what do you mean by that term, right? What do you mean? Like, what are you trying to signify? And this is, and it's some of these are tests of sincerity, right?
Sure.
And you have to realize, and obviously how I'm talking on a podcast to people who are mostly Catholic is very different than how I would actually be talking to somebody if they did hold a different opinion. I probably wouldn't be as passionate,
candid.
right? Or yeah. Well, actually, no, you've seen me. Sometimes I am. And for some people, that's actually a good thing, right? So my friend Aaron, right? We disagree on a lot. I'm very passionate in conversation with him, but it actually works, right? And I've made that decision because I know him well and I know that we can have passionate conversation to make progress. But other people, that isn't the case. And you have to be more patient and whatever. And sometimes you can just, there's certain litmus tests to kind of gauge a level of sincerity in conversation. And you might be able to say, okay, maybe I could push harder, but this person is kind of, they're digging their heels in. They're getting very upset. Maybe the best thing for me to do would actually just not keep making the arguments right now, try and restore the relationship and represent this another time. And that's a very hard thing to do. But remember, the goal is not to just win an argument. The goal is to affect conversion, to save souls. So sometimes you gotta realize, okay, maybe I just hit pause for a little bit.
Yeah, it doesn't mean conceding your point and backtracking and saying, well, maybe you could be right. Maybe there's a place for all of us to be right. But you can still be ecumenical, but also still be very. You can still honor the truth.
Right. And of course, remember to ask questions too. Is like, hey, why do you think that? Where did you hear that? What makes you think that that's true? What would get you to change your mind? That's always a good question.
Ooh.
What would get you to change your mind?
That's a good one.
How would you know if you're wrong? There's another good one. And as Catholics, we should have that too. Right? So like the cool thing about the Catholic Church is it's kind of falsifiable, right? Like if there was a time in history where like the Catholic Church fundamentally changed its dogmas, right? It said, we no longer believe in the Trinity. We're just straight, right? That would show that the church defected, right? Yeah. But we have 2,000 years of empirical evidence and support in favor of the indefectibility of the church. The Catholic Church, despite the corruption, despite even the very bad popes, has stayed firm in her faith, morals, authority, and sacraments. Incredible testimony.
And even the things that, our modern sensibilities may object to in the Catholic faith now, say against abortion or same-sex marriages or women being priests or whatever it is. These are not new objections. These are objections that the Catholic Church has defended over and over again throughout the past 2 millennia, that if you take a brief, even just perusal of Catholic history or Catholic Church history, you're going to find all this stuff. This is nothing new. Everything old is new again.
And, once you appreciate the indefectibility of the church, everything should fall in place. It's kind of the master argument, right? Like once you see that the church has authority for a reason and is a good reason, and that we should rejoice in that, because like what a relief. Like God wants us to know. He doesn't want everyone to have to be like a souped up Aristotle, like an Aquinas. Like you don't have to just try and figure every single little detail out yourself. We have the church that we can rely on to guide us, to give us the grace, to teach us, to lead us. And it's such a gift. And there's so much freedom and liberation, right?
Yes.
And leaning into the church and realizing there is so much wisdom and goodness here.
Right.
And when you can make that paradigm shift, you'll see that it's the most beautiful, wonderful gift. It's not some backwards oppressive thing. It's there to liberate us, not oppress us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the onus is not on each and every one of us to redefine and rediscover our beginning and our end and the meaning of life. And that's a really heavy charge to give to anybody. And we don't have to do it all on our own. It's already been done. And all we have to do is agree to it, give our fiat, and go forth. And
I will just say, for anybody who wants to understand more, like that's a good thing. Like you want to understand Catholic Church teaching, and I would encourage that, because what you'll do when you dive into this is you'll come to a deeper appreciation of it, and you realize, it's just like this happened to me, and I'll make this my last point, is like, even as we're becoming Catholic, I wasn't entirely sold on the authority thing at first. I'm like, well, I kind of think this, and the church seems to think that, and I do more research. I'd be like, oh, dang, the church was right. The arguments are better for that. And I'd be like, well, what about this thing that I kind of think, and the church thinks something different? Oh, church is right again. What about this thing? And I think, oh, church is right again. Church is right again. Church is right again. Pat was wrong. Pat was wrong. Pat was wrong. Pat was wrong. And you just get to this point where you're like, okay, maybe I'm the idiot.
Just an exercise in humility over and over.
Yeah, right? So, search it out, unpack it, but do it in faith and confidence and love, because you want to understand, and you better want to understand, not because you see the church in the wrong way.
Right. I did a podcast a while back about the difference between, is curiosity a bad thing when it comes to our faith? And there's a difference between studiousness and curiosity. So always seek the truth, not just as a way of dissenting, but as a way of learning and diving deeper into it.
Amen.
All right. Wow. Well, I am excited to see the end product that you've been working on. And if anybody else, I don't know if you want to talk about the St. Paul Street Evangelization anymore, where they can find it, because this is good stuff.
Their website, I think it's just stpaulstreetevangelization.com. But if you just Google them, you'll find it, and wonderful stuff there. So please go check them out. They're just doing really good work. Just old school street evangelization, just what we need, right? Hitting the streets, starting conversations, trying to bring more people into the church. So please do check them out. Please do support them. St. Paul Street Evangelization.
Awesome. Okay, everyone, until next time, don't forget to subscribe, and please leave a very nice review. I've gotten a couple, I think 3 new reviews this week, which has been a wonderful thing to see. So thank you so much if you took the time to even do a rating. If you write a review, even better, wherever you listen to the Catholic Mama podcast. I appreciate each and every one of those reviews and ratings. So keep it up, please. It helps spread this little ministry across the internet, which is so full of terrible things, but we can be a light for Christ in the middle of this dark world. I always think of that Dave Chappelle sketch on what the internet's like if it was actually like a strip mall or a mall. Have you remember that? Oh, okay. Well, it just goes to, it's just like, walking along, there's a store, and then really you start walking down some weird hallways, and there's some really dark things that you don't want anything, immoral things you don't want anything to do with. But then there's goodness in the internet, and I hope this is one of them. So share the joy, share the love, and until next time, everyone.
God's beloved, I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
For listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.